So I guess before I begin, has anybody seen Rex, used Rex perhaps? Okay, has anybody used Ansible, Puppet, Chef, anything else? All right, so we got a couple of people who know what this kind of stuff is done. So contrary, or I guess a little bit differently from all those other things that I just mentioned, Rex is about running tasks. Indeed, its name stands for Remote Executor. So you define your tasks in a Rex file, and you can define your tasks simply like this. We've got a description, we've got our documentation for our task, we've got a task, we give it a name, and it's a Perl subroutine. And what we're going to do in our task is we're going to run df-h on our /user directories. When I wrote this talk, I worked at a place where they would mount a bunch of hard drives as user 1, user 2, user 3, and those were the only hard drives that we had total access to. They obviously kept us from root for everything else. So these are where we put our data, and therefore this is where I needed to know how much data, how much hard drive space we had left. We were a data warehouse and they wouldn't give us new data. Like, I have no idea. Anyway, so Rex comes with a command to run our tasks. If I want to run df, all I have to do is type rex df. Is that visible to everybody? Good, because this presentation does not allow me to change it. Like, that zooming in does not work. So if I run rex df, I get some logging saying that I'm running df on our local host, but then it gives us the output of the df command. So this is a basic Rex task. I use the run, and I can run anything I want. But that's not really useful. What I really want is to be able to run this task on another host. So I can do that very simply by using the -h flag to specify which host I want this to run on. So if I want to run this on one of my dev servers, which I won't try to explain why it's named that, I can just give it the host right on the command line. So this will connect using SSH. So we actually don't need anything on the host machine except an SSHD. And then it will, so it uses our SSH config, it uses our keys. If we need a password, it'll prompt for a password. And then it will run df and give us our output. So if we want, we can actually specify multiple hosts. So this will actually run on PAP 01, 2, 04, so 01, 02, 03, and 04. These were all my dev servers, or sorry, all my production servers, the P. And this will give us the output 4 times. So we can also use Rex to deploy files. These are basically the two kind of common systems administrator tasks. First we need to run some things, and then we need to move some files somewhere. We can do that quite simply. We define a task, and Rex provides us with a file function. We tell it the target file, we want to ensure that it's there, and here locally is where you get the source. So this is my HTTP conf, and I'm going to deploy it from my local, obviously it's going to be a Git repository to make sure that we're all tracking this. And then while we're deploying, we can get a callback. So in the case of Apache especially, we need to be able to restart Apache. So when we change this file, we're going to need to run Apache control restart. So in addition to just our files, just the files, we can actually generate these files from templates as well. So if we want, we can say that here is the server that we're connected to. For example, if we want to put in server name in our Apache config, and then we can generate this config from a template. and then give that the content of our file. All very standard. If we didn't have these features, this would not be a administrator's tool. So the Rex file can also configure predefined sets of hosts. So previously we had to specify the host we wanted on the command line, but that gets annoying very quickly. So Rex file allows us to configure groups. So here I can say that I've got ops was the team that I was on, and we've got our production, we've got our user acceptance testing, and we've got our dev. And these are the servers for those. And now I can recall those later to run a task. So rather than saying this is the host that I want to run on, I can say this is the group that I want to run on. So as before, I can say the -G and the group, and it will give us the results of DF on both of our hosts. So in addition to groups, we also have another kind of configuration called environments. And an environment allows us to set up different kinds of things for if we're in dev, if we're in prod. But importantly, it allows us to kind of share our group names. So consider this kind of be a namespace for our information. So I can say that in dev, here's a group of all my servers. Here's my Reuters server, which is allowed to connect to the market. Here's my database server, which is where I store all my time series. But in production, we've got some different hosts for those exact same tasks. And this is important because then it allows me to say, when I run my task in my environment, I can set my environment from the command line, and then I can say that when I'm in dev, in my database, I want to see how much disk I have free. So now I don't really need to know the layout and the archaic host name that I have. I can just say that, okay, well, the dev DB, tell me how much disk I've got. So we've also got other configuration. Host names are obviously the most important. We can also set variables. So we've got datlib is what we called our deployment directory. And in a certain environment, we had a different deployment directory. Our user acceptance testing was a repurposed DR server. And so rather than convince the sysadmins to change the name of our deploy directory, we just kind of let them use it. Anybody who's worked in a large corporation knows that the sysadmins can be difficult to convince of the necessity of things. And I won't get into the DBAs. So we can define a task then that uses these variables, sets a variable, gets the variable, and then we can restart our application. So we need to know where the application is before we can restart it. And then, like before, I'm defining this is my environment, this is the group, and this is the task that I'm trying to run. PC is our process controller. But if you notice, there's a lot of typing here. But first, I'm going to talk about tasks. So in addition to the being able to run tasks, we can also have tasks that run other tasks. This was especially important for my release process, which consists of a series of steps that I wanted to be able to start from the middle. So I can say to update our release, I can define an update task. I can even define what the group is by default. So if I don't specify which server this task needs to run on, it's going to default to this server. And then once I update our process controller, I can then run the restart. So now every time I try to update our application, the restart automatically happens. But I also have that restart as its own task that I can run at any time. So as mentioned previously, this was really helpful for my release. that consisted of staging the release, building the release, deploying the release, testing the release, and then any post-release checks. If any one of those steps failed, I had to be able to start halfway through, so I didn't have to stage the release again, which took about 20 minutes. And 20 minutes on a Friday at 6 p.m. was the only window they allowed us, and I really don't want to be in the office anymore. So now if I run the update PC task, my app gets updated and my app gets restarted. So in addition to defining all my config in my file, I can actually pass in command line parameters. This was really helpful. I created a task to install CPAN modules. And in my task, I could then say, here are my command line options. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow a module option. That is either a comma or space separated value. And then I'm going to run CPAN to install those modules. So then I can, for every box I have in dev, install the Modulicious and Dancer because I really want them to duke it out. And Rex can do a lot more. This is a very basic introduction. Rex can sync directories, entire directories, using rsync being the best tool for that. If you use the Rex commands rsync, which is included, and then all you have to do is say sync this local directory to this remote directory. This is how I deploy a lot of code and how I deploy a lot of websites. Rex has more configuration. It has the CMDB, which is the Configuration Management Database. Excuse me. If you've used Ansible, you may recognize this kind of thing. It allows you to configure your stuff on a per host basis, but allows you to configure also by environment, by operating system, and a bunch of other variables, and then all of these configurations are coalesced into this configuration that is specific to this machine that happens to be at this time running this operating system and happens to be declared as part of this environment. So you can say that, for example, on a Debian, you need your HTTPD conf to be in a certain place, whereas in Red Hat, it needs to be in a completely different place. Rex has plugins. If you go to modules.rexify.org, you can get plugins for Rex. Some of them are on CPAN, some of them are not. This is the canonical repository for them. And are there any questions? Yes?
I've never used Rex, but I think there was a task files.
Right.
They look just like Perl scripts, so can you just drop in Perl?
Yes, they are exactly Perl scripts. I mean, they're run obviously as part of the Rex process, but yes, any Perl you want to use, they're just Perl. You can load whatever modules you want. If you want to, read a YAML file, read a Git repository. Indeed, that's how our release was automated. Is we used the Books Git repository module, and we had this big group of submodules. I don't recommend this at all, but this is how we did it. And it would tag a release in every single submodule. There's 50 of these, and that's why it took 20 minutes. And then push all those submodules up, and then do the same thing on the other end to pull it back down. So yes, any Perl is allowed, and indeed the Perl syntax highlighting works perfectly. Yes?
This sounds like it's fulfilling in a need that wasn't covered by Ansible or any of the other state management tools. I've been using Salt personally.
Okay.
And it's got runners as well that I can say, hey, go do this for me with all these parameters as well. What hole did this fill for you that wasn't covered by Ansible? Whatever you worried about.
Right. So actually, so at the place I wrote this and started using Rex at, we wrote an Ansible alike, which we called the Draco. It was written in Perl, but it worked very much like I understand Ansible to work now. There was a bunch of static YAML files with declarations saying file, directory, function, script, plugin, etc. And the problem that I had with that system that we wrote was that as part of my release that takes, in total an hour, 20 minutes to stage, 40 minutes to test. If the tests failed, I had to start from the beginning because we're talking about state here, and if this directory exists, I can't just ignore it because it might be in an inconsistent state. So what I really want to do is I want to be able to say, okay, I've staged it, I've built it, start from the tests, and then continue on from there. I don't know if Ansible allows us to do anything like that, but I know the tool that we had at the time did not. And it's basically if you're halfway through, moving to the desired state, how do you indicate that you want to start in the middle where you need to start? I also used to use CF Engine 4, and it's very much the same thing. Like, I declare that this is what my box needs to look like when I'm done, and maybe I'll help you decide how to do that. But it can be difficult to do ad hoc things like, I just need to run DF on a bunch of servers. I just need to install this one CPAN module on a bunch of servers, that kind of thing. So ad hoc little tasks that I can just throw at 20 or 30 servers was really helpful for me.
Can I ask the time frame that you started working with this?
So I did my first, that CPAN task and that DF task. I did that in an hour or two. How long ago?
Yeah.
I started about 2 or 3 years ago, and I've started using it more and more for personal projects. So, for example, my websites all have Rex files that deploy themselves using the static site generator I built. And CPAN testers, I've been writing a CPAN testers deploy script that allows me to deploy the database, deploy the cron tabs, run a diff on the cron tabs before I deploy it because I have no idea who else has been up in there, that kind of thing. So yeah, I've been working for a couple years now.
I have a question for you then.
Yeah.
So I've been using Ansible quite a lot. One of the things I like about it is you do the correct state, like you just mentioned, but you also get good feedback of this was at a bad state, this was a good state. So what does your feedback look like when you run a bunch of things and something fails or something goes well? What do you get?
So by default, it's very Perl-like in that if you're not looking for an error, you're not going to find one. For example, in my tasks, when so for here, the sync, you can do a verbose mode, and it will, be like rsync verbose. But in the original tasks I was writing, which is probably all the way at the beginning, here we go. You'll notice that I'm actually saying the output. And this allows me to get the output. So this allows me to get the output as a scalar, and I can say it, or I can, for example, I can test for a file using run, and then throw an error if I want to. So that's all. Most of that stuff is kind of manual. The file stuff. There are ways to say ensure this line exists, and that will give you proper feedback if that line does not exist or if it's not able to insert that line. Yes.
So does it run tasks in parallel if you give it multiple hosts to test against?
There is a way, yes, to run tasks in parallel. By default, it won't. It'll be serial, but you can pass the -j flag to run it. There are a couple actual back ends. I believe the primary one is just a simple fork, but it can actually use Gearman as well. So if you have an actual job runner system, you can run on massively parallel jobs.
So if you give it multiple tasks to run at once, will it wait for the first task to finish on all the servers and then move on, or will it just?
That is an excellent question. I don't know. If you're doing with the run task inside the task, it will probably it's more of a mapper, and so the task includes the other task basically. I don't know. I've never tried running multiple task names on the command line. so I couldn't tell you if that's a thing. There are on Freenode, pound rex on Freenode is there, and the devs are rather responsive. So if you have any questions that I haven't answered, definitely go in there and give them a chat. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you very much.